Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest virtual program, Navigating the New World of Athletics Administration. We have a relative old timer in Drew Berst putting this on today. Drew's been around a while and pretty much was raised in this business. And Travis is, although he's been an administrator for a long time, he's relatively new AD. So we're excited about what they both have to say. And I just want to give the audience a little bit of a warning. We have two Jayhawks on the screen, and I don't mean just by location. Both of them are graduates of the University of Kansas. So I'm sure at some point in time during the session, they're going to be leading you in a rock chalk Jayhawk chant. So, but seriously, looking forward to this conversation. Thank you both very much for being with us today. And Drew, thanks for hosting us, and look forward to your comments. Thanks again.
Thank you. Yep. Thanks, you, Bob and Dana. Yeah, we really appreciate it. A lot of fun to have this conversation, and thank you, NACDA, again, for your support and the chance to do this. So, but yes, we're both Jayhawks, but I will remain unbiased, and we'll start with, how about that football game?
Yeah, real unbiased, Drew. We had a good night in Austin on Saturday, and much needed boost for the young men in particular who've been working so hard and fighting through some tough Saturdays too, coming back to work on a Monday. And obviously with a new head coach, good to get a meaningful win on the road in particular.
Yeah, it truly. So setting aside bias, what was the symbology? Like, was that a symbolic moment in your mind for the program? And knowing the history, was that a big moment or just a moment?
No, it was a big moment, because where we've been with our program and where we have to go, and the amount of work and the amount of steps that we have to take. Close losses early in the year, may have been considered a big step forward, and that's just the reality of where we've been, and again, where we're trying to go. And you have a new staff, a new head coach, you've got a campus community and an alumni and donor base who really want to believe and get behind that program. You've got a group again in the locker room of young men who maybe haven't had a lot of success during their time here. And what you really need is some validation that the hard work, the patience, the buy-in, the commitment, and the support, behind the university, the athletic department, can create tangible results. And so we live in a measurable society. We live in a society where you have to have tangibles. You have to have outcomes. It's a goal-oriented world we're in, and certainly intercollegiate athletics, that's the name of the game, right? And so if you can't get one of those, it's a lot tougher. And especially as we get into November, it's a positive step forward for us, but long way to go, nothing new in that regard. It just reaffirms to me, and I think to those of us who are seeing it, living it day in and day out, that we have the right leader in Lance Leinfold, and we're off the ground and have a great opportunity with this football program here at KU.
Yeah, no, understand. Especially at a time when everyone's starting to talk basketball in this fan base. Normally, It was good timing for that to happen too.
Right.
Okay, so let's get a little harder. You get hired. What was your first day?
My first day would have been April 6th, I want to say. Spring, April 6th, this past spring.
Normal, anytime, right? You step into the AD role, there's all sorts of things you have to sort, right? Then you're hit pretty quickly with a pretty big announcement, right, from the conference. We're not here to talk about realignment, but that's a curveball you're not expecting. So I'm curious, kind of the initial strategy you had coming in and what you were looking to focus on already. Then you're sort of hit with this external factor. Did it change? How much did that disrupt some of the things you were trying to already be doing? I'm just curious how sort of all of that series of events, how hard was that to navigate? How much did it cause you to change?
Yeah, I mean, I felt really good about the organization, the plan, the focus, the knowledge coming in as an alum, as a Jayhawk who had followed along to an extent, not a great extent, had some relationships, but nothing that I was keeping tabs on month in and month out back here in Lawrence. I'd been really focused on Northwestern and young family. And prior to that, my time at Tulane and 17 years away from KU. Yeah. So I've always had, though, a unique lens, again, as an alum. Who grew up in a Jayhawk household, came to school here, and then loved my experience and was a proud alum over the course of time that I had left. So, had a good framework coming in, knew enough through the interview process and was prepared enough through the interview process to come in here with a plan that that I was, confident in, and that had enough feedback from kind of critical stakeholders along the way. Some of that through the interview process, and some of that as soon as I was hired. So really getting off the ground. I mean, just to probably oversimplify for purposes of today, it was a relational oriented plan. What's that mean? That means really establishing real, authentic, transparent relationships with the people in the building, coaches, with staff, demonstrating that in real ways and tangible ways, where it wasn't just interactions and conversation, but it was, again, providing transparency about, some of my early kind of visioning for the department, extending across campus. There's a lot of focus on obviously needing to spend a lot of time with our chancellor, with his leadership team, getting to know our most important stakeholders as far as donors and alumni and volunteers out there. So getting a groundwork in a foundation built based on relationships, based on communication, based on transparency, and based on some early vision stuff. Nothing that was real formulated yet at that juncture. So felt good after a couple months of that. Obviously, we hired a football coach. That was an extensive, critical moment in time, not for me, as important as it was for me, but for the entire university. We had to get that right, and we had the unique window in the spring to do that, right? Really zero in at a time when the market was quiet, as opposed to what we're on the cusp of here in the next handful of weeks, and has already began. Then you get into that sort of fall planning stretch, and as a new AD, there's a laundry list of things you want to achieve. You want to launch a strategic planning process. You want to continue the relationship building aspects of things, and the conference situation became very, let's call it what it was, very, very unstable, very, frankly, concerning to an extent, because it just was a volatile moment in time with the Texas and OU information leaking. And then, of course, the position that put us in the Big 12 to figure out what that meant, where we wanted to go. I was new, not just in the obvious sense of being a new AD, but new in the sense of trying to understand the dynamics of the Big 12, right? Where does Kansas and our chancellor and me as the athletic director fit in having voice and or strength? And as a new AD, I'm not coming in, I have enough awareness and humility to know, with a bunch of really respected, seasoned ADs in the Big 12, I'm not coming in, with the plan and the vision and pounding the table about where the Big 12 should go. Plus, that's not really the AD's role as much as it is, that's to the board, which are the presidents and the chancellors, along with the commissioner. And so getting through that in the best manner we could, which again, to me, was focused on having real conversations with the league, with other ADs in the league, leaning on my chancellor to get an understanding of kind of where he was and how he wanted to play a hand in the Big 12's plan kind of moving forward, and just kind of understand that landscape. That's about as much as you can do. There was no blueprint for that. I don't think anybody had a blueprint for it. Certainly, me in my situation at that moment in time didn't have, but remain steady, remain frankly confident with, hey, University of Kansas, we're going to be okay, in the Big 12's going to be okay, because it's a strong conference with some optionality, some ability to re-solidify itself with a plan that demonstrated some strength, and that's ultimately how it played out.
Yeah, I am curious on one part. When that happens, when that announcement happens, Texas, you get more questions from internal teams, or you get more questions from external donor, alumni, fan base with panic or whatever it may be?
I would say I credit the department and our head coaches. There wasn't panic around here in terms of the internal constituents. Now, maybe, I was so new that they weren't wanting to demonstrate that, right? Sure. And I certainly wasn't going to demonstrate that, nor did I believe it was a time to panic or overreact, certainly. Our stakeholders, our donors, our alumni, our campus leadership, again, stayed pretty steady. And that was without a whole lot of information. There was certainly a stretch of time where you weren't able to, not because of really as much confidentiality as it was because there wasn't a clear, immediate path forward, and you didn't know what other dominoes might drop, right? And so it wasn't because of a robust amount of information that people, kind of kept their wits about them. I think it was more about, okay, let's keep our bearings. Let's make sure we're engaged in the right manners, and let's make sure, that we continue to not just believe in what the University of Kansas is and in our, innate strengths and the assets we provide the conference, but also that we use it as an opportunity to really identify and zero in on the challenges that we might face, or frankly, the on the ledger, the liabilities that we have. And it probably wasn't, ironic that we had just hired, in my estimation then, and even more strongly in my estimation now, the right leader of our football program. And knowing that football was going to be at the time and was going to continue to be at the forefront of what drives the changing landscape out there, it just reaffirmed our commitment that we had the right person at the helm, that we had the right investment behind him in that program, and that we were moving forward there.
Yeah,
So,
no, that all makes sense.
Yeah.
So setting aside the realignment talk, I am curious from a strategy planning standpoint, things I think this audience is going to really care about. What would you find to be? What were you surprised that maybe the athletic department wasn't quite prepared for, right, from a strategy perspective, and what they really were? Were there any things like walking in, now you've done your sort of audit of everything that's going on? Did you find like, oh gosh, we're great, we're really well positioned for this, and I thought we'd be better positioned for that? And then I'm curious, then as you look forward, right, strategy going forward, you kind of maybe what you're thinking coming in and how that's changed, whatnot, if that makes sense.
No, I mean, I think it's probably more of a product of just the last 2 to 2.5 years, not just at Kansas, but in college athletics and society, right? You got, in our case, we had a new leader who was getting up and running in his tenure, some freshness to that, the normal aspects that now I'm living in my role, and then a pandemic comes into play, right? And that's stunted and stifled all of us to an extent, at least for a stretch of time. And you're just finding your way through that. Then, personally here at KU, there was a challenging transition last early spring in March with both the head football coach and the athletic director. So it was less about, I came into a place where there wasn't strategy or focus or clarity about where to go, than it was more about, well, this had been a interesting, to say the least, couple years with added layers beyond the pandemic, which has already been enough of a challenge. So it was really more about, okay, what's the place need, in my estimation, the place and the people need some love, they need some care, they need some positive affirmation. They needed, in my case, somebody that could really understand and show a unique appreciation for the University of Kansas. And of course, they needed information, and they needed some resemblance of plan and vision. And again, I don't know of a great leader that shows up with the plan and the vision, because if they do, it's not been informed by the current state of that particular organization. And so just demonstrating that when and where you have opportunities without, overreaching, so to speak, because what I've wanted to do was making sure that this place and this campus and our people are guiding us on the direction, on our, frankly, a strategic plan, which is what we're underway with right now as we speak.
So you have a lot of people here that have lived through all that change, right? There's a lot of inherent knowledge that exists here, so that makes sense. And so as you look at the strategic plan, I realize still formulating, but could you mind sharing some of the initiatives, some of the things that you're looking at, maybe how that's changed over the last few months, or if maybe it hasn't at all, maybe stay the course?
I mean, I wouldn't say there's been real profound shifts since kind of we started the early conversations around that, or some early recognition that I had either through the process and of course those first handful of months. I think what shifted is the landscape of intercollegiate athletics. So if you haven't responded to that at your place or within your planning, then I think that's where there's real risk. And so for us, it's probably reaffirmed a lot of what was obvious. Football has to be built in the right manner. We have to have, in our case, more significant philanthropic support that we really, frankly, have not tapped into, for a variety of reasons for a long time. We've been a lot more reliant upon, what Allen Fieldhouse and this basketball program drives, which thankfully has been, very, very healthy. But going forward, we know we've got to build out an operation and a culture that is more focused on philanthropic fundraising and an athletic department and certainly a development team that operates in that manner. We've got so many great people here to execute that work. They need me and maybe part my track record, but frankly, my perspective around KU to help guide and push us forward in that light. As it relates to basketball at Kansas, if you're not investing in and paying close attention to what we need to do to continue to elevate and propel men's basketball, literally calling what it is, men's basketball, because of what it's done for our place for generations and for decades, then your head's in the sand. So having real conversations with Coach Self, navigating any of the challenges that are out there in basketball or around our particular program, you've got to own that. You've got to spend time with that, and you've got to make sure we're positioning men's basketball to not just maintain, but to excel at an even higher level than what it has, which is a heck of a challenge because it's been such a remarkable program for so long. It's such a fueling part of our athletic department. And then without a shadow of the doubt, right, we're looking at all the other programs as well, but those are in the really early phases of what else can we do to support the rest of our programs. What are the resource gaps that we have? And I'd say the last thing, Drew, on that, again, probably oversimplifying, is, are we going to be a strategic partner with the institution, or are we going to be more siloed and living down here in the bubble down the hill? And we've got options there. I mean, truly, no one says to us in terms of how we're structured that you have to day in and day out operate as a strategic integrated partner with campus. But thanks in some part, because of my 17 years in the private institutions at Northwestern and at Tulane, and thanks in some part due to my perspective as an alum, somebody who got a great degree here, who understands the value far beyond athletics, we're not going to sit idle in that regard, and we're going to be a much more integrated and partnered aspect of the campus community. So making sure we're paying attention to that and talking about that, and then I have to lead in that manner day in and day out, which I think early on has been really important.
That's great to hear. And I think that pivots pretty nicely. I am curious about name, image, likeness and how you see that as part of that strategy. I'm also a little curious, if you don't mind, where you see that going in particular, to add my opinion. I've always kind of thought name, image, likeness might be a great way to fill some of the spending gap with certain sports, right? If content is king, right, some of these sports might find opportunity in that, but that means athletic department program working together with individuals. So I'm curious, just, name, image, likeness, where you see that going, how you see that as part of the strategy with basketball, football, and in the future. Just,
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's one of the really kind of areas that I alleviate some pressure, not just on myself, but on the department, in a sense, is we don't have to pretend to know what name, image, and likeness is going to look like in 6'9", 18, 24. I don't think anybody does. And then the other part of it is, thankfully, the work that had been done here last year before the rollout, before July 1, it was really strong. I mean, we were pretty well positioned as a department. And then getting into July, when it became permissible, it was more about, let's make sure we have the right policy for KU athletics now, right? And all we can know is what now looks like, which means no state legislation, certainly no federal legislation, and then minimal guidelines from the NCAA. I mean, that's exactly what that is. Don't use it as an inducement. Make sure that there's a real service rendered, and otherwise, not a whole lot of guidance there. And so we needed to create a policy, which we did over the course of May and June and into July, that was going to fit where Kansas athletics was. And we feel really good about that. We also wanted to make a policy that, didn't have to be set in stone, that could have some pliability in the opportunity for it to evolve as things matured in NIL. And we're 5 months in, right? So for 5 months in at KU, we feel good. I mean, I think the resources we're putting at it is strong. I think you'd stack it up there with anything out there. I think the way our coaches have not just embraced it, but made sure they're being very mindful of either whether you call it precedent setting, or some of the way I think about it is, at some juncture, there's going to be more of an even playing field, right? whether it be through federal legislation, I think, which most of us are hopeful that does occur at some juncture. What I don't want to have to do is unwind from where we've been if there is a more level playing field set via, again, federal legislation.
Sure. You mean
So-
like if restrictions come?
Yeah, and all of
sure.
a sudden
Sure.
you're having to go backwards in how you've applied it on your campus. And so I feel like the things we're doing and the opportunities that have been provided our young men and women fit really well with the intent behind NIL.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to get that right early and not overreach. And then I think you have to be willing to just evolve as things present themselves. I mean, our biggest NIL story is the third string walk-on tight end / fullback who caught the 2-point conversion on Saturday night that I don't know if some of his teammates knew who he was up until that moment. And now here he is, this wonderful NIL success story. Thankfully, and certainly there's a lot more success stories out there from a variety of perspectives. So that's kind of where I see it and where we're at in that regard.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And yes, it is. I was going to bring it up. It's a perfect example of in today's economy and how that you can capitalize in a way like never before. It's all logical, but yeah,
Right.
I am curious. And I also realize everyone's trying to get their arms around NIL before you can figure out the true strategy capabilities of it.
Right.
Right. So I do understand. So I am curious, it's kind of jumping back, but a tiny bit. I am curious the positives that have come out of the pandemic from operational communication, So with all of this change, everyone talks gloom. From my perspective, there's some very great things that have actually, weird thing to say, come out of it. I'm curious, what are some of the positives you've had experienced, seen, efficiencies, whatever it may be that come from pandemic and all the change?
I think there's probably a handful of things. I think one is, maybe better grasp on fiscal responsibility, right? Is really, hopefully all of us can carry forward some of the learnings of having to manage under the huge cloud and the questions that the pandemic provided from a revenue perspective, right?
Yeah.
I think most of us are kind of easing back into previously known revenues. And so hopefully we don't go backward in terms of just the maybe at times over expenditure that happens, or some of the culture around that in college athletics. So I think that can be a real positive takeaway, and not just a conservative mindset, but more strategic mindset in where we're investing. Yeah. And I think for us, that's where we're trying to spend a lot of time talking about what's the strategic investment with where we're allocating resources and where we're pushing on revenues. So I think that's one. I think two is every campus in the country has worked more closely, or every athletic department in the country has worked more closely with campus through the pandemic, a more reliance upon partners and other leaders on campus. And I hope and believe that will be something that's more ingrained, that maybe reaching across the aisle, so to speak, because we've all had this shared experience through the pandemic, is something that carries us forward and we can all benefit. And our campuses can benefit from that. That's that more, I think, integrated approach that I think is really healthy for college athletics that we've all had to live through the pandemic. I think the other piece is here we are, and we've been in full football stadiums across the country. We're now moving indoors, or volleyball's been indoors in particular. Now we're moving indoors with the basketball programs, men's and women's. And we're being reminded of the power and the impact of live athletics, live sports. And in our world, in particular, the value of and the importance of in our society of intercollegiate athletics. And it's probably, something that we all could have taken for granted up until, 22 months ago or whatever it's been now. And so I think hopefully bringing some of that appreciation forward and recognizing the importance of being in venue together, the personal connections that are made, the emotional experiences that come from that. How do we build upon that? How do we be better in our venues?
No, I mean, that's the one we've kind of always said. People won't like the term, but the value, right? The core value of the sporting product, right? College athletics product is the passionate, raucous environment that is in the live experience, and it's been hard, right, to not have that. Sure. And you're right. We have an asset right there, Allen Fieldhouse, that's pretty special. I am curious from an engagement standpoint, and then we can probably turn it over to questions the audience will have for you. But from an engagement standpoint with donors, fan base, student athletes, recruits, have you moved to a more digital platform? Have you changed a little bit of that approach as a result of the pandemic, and then just carried on behaviors, right? Some Allen Fieldhouse might not be hard direct to refill, but maybe some of the other things are.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
I think what I've seen and I'm really proud of at KU is, Dan Beckler and his team in communications and sort of that strategic communications lens have done a really, really wonderful job of storytelling. And we all know the opportunities that social media provides. We all know the opportunities that video provides, right? And that we all got comfortable with through the pandemic, like what we're doing today. But we're doing a really nice job, and that group's doing a really nice job of providing intimate stories of our student athletes and their experience, and not just our current, but former coaches, and ways to just really bring that to life in a profound way, and doing it in a way that there's a menu. It could be people that, hey, they want to read something, right? I think we've all forgotten the value of just literally reading a profile on an individual. And then of course there's always going to be video, and then the snippets that comes via social media. So I think there's more of a menu there, and I think we've all paid closer attention to making sure we're tapping into that menu well, and that hopefully in the absence of being in person, face to face, in the connections that we've missed through the pandemic, we're doing a better job of creating those more intimate, personal reactions through the storytelling process. So I know that that's something that's going to stay with us as we move forward, regardless of where technology goes. I think you've really got to bring to life the stories of these, in our case, the young men and the young women here competing for the University of Kansas. Yeah,
it's funny. We're just doing some research, and one thing that's interesting coming out of the pandemic is how open fans are now to year-round engagement, like to those stories, right? It's got to be worthwhile content, but yeah, which is to me opportunities.
Right,
that makes a ton of sense.
Right.
Let's see how far in we are in. What do I say? Yeah, so let's rather than me blabber, I think this audience, would definitely have some questions for you that that are related to them. So, Dana, if you don't mind, we'll open it up to questions for folks, and let me stop talking.
All right, we have a couple of questions coming in, but I do want to encourage, again, our attendees who are joining us live. If you have questions for Travis, please send them in through either the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get those answered for you. Our first question, we are seeing a noticeable trend of change at the AD level. Travis, what do you think university leaders are particularly looking for in this position within today's current climate?
No, that's a good question. Yeah, really good question. Well, I think what I can probably speak to specifically is what I believe the University of Kansas was looking for, somewhat uniquely, but likely not that unique, which is really some more continuity. And continuity is hard in college athletics. Continuity is hard in entry-level positions. It's hard in middle management. It's hard in senior leadership positions in departments. It's hard certainly in the coaching side of things, and I think it's difficult with athletic directors as well. So I think and I hope that there's more of a focus on how do you bring in a leader that really fits the institution, the ideals, and the values, so that you have a higher likelihood of retaining through what I know we all believe, which is going to be a pretty transformative time in intercollegiate athletics. So we've all become pretty accustomed to maybe higher rates of turnover. And I'm hopeful that there's a shift there. And I know I wouldn't be sitting in this position at the University of Kansas if I didn't give us maybe a stronger chance of continuity based on my affiliation, the care I have for the place, the desire I have to enhance and make the University of Kansas a better and stronger institution, and certainly athletics department. So I'd say a focus on the continuity factors maybe has been part of the shift from an athletic director perspective.
Yeah, so people's minds would tend to go towards business, right? Because sort of the changing environment. But it's interesting, do you think across the board that actually passion for the actual institution, passion for that actual school has a little more value than it did before? I mean, I know
it certainly could. I mean, I think it's unique. It's maybe not real commonplace that fit in that alignment occurs like it did, maybe for me in this situation. But I certainly think that we all talk about fit, and that's not a new concept. We've talked about
Sure.
fit for years and decades in every industry, and we have in college athletics, but that's become, in my eyes, no doubt more important.
Yeah.
And the ways in which you use to determine fit, I think, have to be more robust. I mean, you can't just feel it via the way somebody describes their desire
Yeah.
to be at a place.
Yeah.
There has to be some other indicators. You know, again, what are the values? Maybe what are the experiences they've had, or the other institutions they've been in that might translate really well to that particular environment. And then I think the other part of it is, in going through a process, if you don't have a real open, honest assessment about where you are as an institution, and as where you are, and in terms of where you are as a candidate,
Yeah.
that's where I think there's sometimes a misfit of alignment. And so hopefully the search processes, help facilitate that as they have, and hopefully candidates have real open, honest assessments as well about what might be the right fit and the right stop for them.
Love it.
So this question kind of looks at the flip side, right? This individual is asking, for those who are in the process of getting a new AD, what were some of the things that your support staff did while you were transitioning, or questions that they asked you that you found to be really helpful as you moved into the AD chair? So how can these people on the call who are getting a new leader support them in the best way?
That's a great question. I mean, I think back so many moments, frankly, hourly, probably in my early months, and even today now, 7 months in, of just how critical the team that's been here has been in my transition and given us some momentum and some wind behind our sails. And that's been a daily endeavor. And there's so many ways in which that's shown up. I think one is really having a desire to establish a really sincere relationship, right? Not overreaching, not being anything or anyone but yourself, would be some words of wisdom that isn't profound, but that I believe is really accurate. What you don't want is the leader to come in and you have presented yourself in a manner that isn't sustainable. So really being yourself, but making an effort to establish a personal relationship. This is absolutely a relationship industry. Intercollegiate athletics is, and athletic directors or leaders of whatever particular unit or entity are coming and looking and seeking strong, sustainable, and trusting partners as they get into their tenure. And so I think that's a really important thing. And then, information matters a lot, but really I think being a good judge of what information is relevant, especially early in a tenure, helps as well. I mean, it is, the old drinking from a fire hose thing.
Mhm.
That's very real. And there were a lot of moments where I felt like I'm getting exactly the right information and people are helping prioritize my time for me. And then of course we all have moments where you go, wait, this is probably not the best use
Mhm.
of my time, energy, or just frankly brain bandwidth, right? When the brain just goes numb and you stop processing because it's coming from every angle. So I think being a resource for helping the leader know what are the most important things to come in and understand and focus on.
Yeah. Have you been impacted by the Great Resignation? Right. So what other companies are dealing with folks coming out of the pandemic, sort of changing priorities, resigning. Have you guys dealt with that much?
I
I'm
mean,
curious.
honestly, we really haven't.
Yeah.
We had some positions that were on hold. We had a really difficult year last year before I arrived, where we had mandatory furloughs.
Yep.
We had salary reductions across the department. So less of that, but more focused on, hey, just general morale building,
Sure,
right?
stability and morale. Yeah.
Morale building and culture building and bringing people back together. We've had to pay close attention. And I think like any organization, November 2021, still reeling in some ways from what we've all been through. You better think about that every day. It doesn't mean you're going to do something significant or profound every day, but the small hallway interactions can even matter in morale building.
Yeah, well said. Sorry. Back to Dana.
In your first 6 months as AD, what have you learned most about yourself as a leader?
I would say that, twofold probably. Number one is, just who I am in terms of not trying to be something else or someone else is enough, number one. right? And so not having moments of weakness around, oh gosh, now that I'm the athletic director, I've got to put on a different front, or I've got to lead or communicate in a different manner. I don't have the ability to do that, because that would be outside of what's allowed me to have some degree of success to date. And then the second thing is having, like, this has been reinforced to me, but it's been reinforced in a heavy way early in my tenure, which is have enough humility and be really comfortable and confident with humility. That's interesting. Isn't it? So that you are just leaning on the people around you. If you're not doing that, you're going to drown, and you're going to have some pretty significant missteps. Not to say I haven't had some missteps in 7 months, but having enough humility to lean on the people who were there, really important piece of it. So being comfortable in your own skin and who you are, and then having humility to rely on the people that are around you.
I'm curious. I think it was Chris Del Conte who told us this story. He said when he changed to the ADC, one thing he figured out quickly was what used to be ideas suddenly became action. So, right, you throw out an idea of, hey, what if we did this when you're, in the associate chair or senior associate chair, and then when you're AD, when you say that, people do it, right? So you have to kind of watch out about, oh, wait, if I say that.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you noticed any of that sort of shift, like, oh wait, that didn't used to happen that way.
Yeah, no, and certainly. And then I think you also recognize that at some juncture ideas are great, but it does become about action. And I think we're in an action-oriented business as well, an industry, right? In intercollegiate athletics and higher education, you can overthink things often, and sometimes just taking that step forward is more than half the battle. So again, having trust in your team and the people around you, measuring and doing risk assessment. If you've done risk assessment and you feel comfortable with what you find there, give it a try, throw it against the wall, get out of the box a little bit, and do things that haven't been done before. And I think that's one of the early maybe litmus tests of a new leader coming in, is demonstrate willingness to try things differently, because that empowers the staff in a way that maybe they haven't had, or maybe they haven't felt for some time.
Makes sense.
All right, we're gonna take a turn back to NIL here. So, we touched on it a little bit, but can you just describe like your level of excitement for, these types of quick turnaround in the moment brand opportunities, and maybe some advice on how administrators can help to manage their student athletes schedule and focus on the tasks at hand, keeping school and sports in the balance?
Yeah, another good one. I would say, like, the example we just talked about with the 2-point conversion from Saturday and the win over Texas, those are the real pure and fun, and I think likely more impactful, obviously for the student athlete who otherwise wasn't getting the opportunity, but I think also for the business entity to capitalize on a moment in time and on a personality, because that's the other part of it. This is about people, human beings, getting to know, take the helmet off, get to know the young man behind that, take the swim cap off, get to know the young woman, who's doing something special in the pool. And I think there is something really neat about the more organic moments that NIL provides us. And then I think the other thing, and I'll come back maybe to a minute to the time management and or education piece. The other thing is we have to remember, not only are those of us in intercollegiate athletics trying to get our legs underneath us, all of the potential partners out there are going, what is this? Is there a return on investment? How would I apply it from my lens as a business owner, or whatever it might be? And so they're 5 months in the same manner we're 5 months in. So I think we're starting to see maybe more, whether it be creative or less obvious opportunities emerge as the business entities get a better grasp on their end. And then as it relates to time management, you hope that, strong cultures within teams, within programs, within athletic departments will help balance that out over time. And I haven't heard many, maybe not even any, real profound stories about our student athletes spending so much time and energy that it's impacting their work in the classroom or impacting their commitment to their team. And there will assuredly be some missteps in some ways in which the locker room gets thrown off a touch by somebody who might be overemphasizing NIL or over promoting the opportunities they're receiving. But I think healthy cultures will correct that just kind of naturally. That's my prediction. I think that's probably been what's happened across the country this far.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I do think your example of was an Applebee's car dealership.
Yeah.
I think it also brought sponsors to the table that wouldn't otherwise be present in college athletics in some cases. I think that's what we're seeing across the board with a lot of the NIL sponsors, if you will.
Right.
And to me, that's nothing but a good thing.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
might get them, more interested in general college athletics.
Yeah, no question.
Okay, another big topic in the industry, DE&I, right? So how are you ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion, a culture throughout your staff and student athletes?
Well, I think it, I mean, truly, again, in the at the risk of oversimplifying a really complicated, challenging dynamic and subject, I think it really starts with being hands-on and intimately involved as a leader in the DE&I efforts. It's not just having somebody bring, programming ideas to you or helping script you at particular moments in time. When it feels important to talk about DE&I, it really means trying to live that day in and day out and hold yourself accountable to an even higher level than you might even hold your own, administrator who oversees DE&I or who is leading DE&I efforts. And that can be a hard thing. There are days that I don't make the kind of impact that I want to make in diversity and inclusion and belonging in all those spaces. But I can tell you that I come back maybe the next day or a couple days later, go, okay, well, what have I done this week, or over a stretch of time to truly make a difference and do it on the ground level. Again, this is a contact sport, right? And I think diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, I think that's a contact sport. You have to be present. You have to understand and engage in uncomfortable conversations. You have to ask questions, and then you have to know who you are and what your background is. I mean, I can only be who I am based on the experiences I had, the background I had, the place in which I grew up in, and then the experiences I've had along the way. And if you're not, I think, owning your own limitations and then of course embracing the growth you need to have individually, you're not leading the department in a very good way as it relates to diversity and inclusion. So I think about it in terms of contact sport, not just being in the meetings, but having interactions daily with staff, with student athletes that strive for a more inclusive environment, plainly, and that's simple. I'm a guy from Western Kansas. I don't know what it's like to be a Black young man growing up in Miami, Florida, right? So sitting down in my office with that a particular student athlete who has a very different experience than I had, and understanding what is it like in 2021 as a 19-year-old living in Lawrence, Kansas, from inner city Miami. What do we need to do to make that a different and better experience for that young person? And you always, I think, you hope you had pride in those opportunities in previous roles, but as the athletic director, it changes, and you go, that's my responsibility. That's not somebody else's responsibility. That's not handing it off to, our leader of DEI. That's understanding from my own lens, so I can be better in that space.
Yeah, I will add, from our perspective, as we look at brands, as we look at companies, as we look at policies, for the first time ever, probably in history, you actually do have consumer behavior driven by the policies of an organization, right? So literally brand loyalty, whether it be college sports or things you buy off the shelf, what people know about those policies of those organizations are actually driving buying decisions. So
Yeah.
it matters more than,
Yeah.
it matters in general, but it matters for you to really know that about your organization. Just FYI.
And that's a great point. Great point.
Similar question, but directed towards mental health. So what programs or what kind of conversations have you had with your staff and your student athletes about how to help them in this space?
Yeah, another great one. Such a huge issue. I was really fortunate when I was at Northwestern over the past probably 18 months of my tenure there to be working intimately with our sports medicine group and our head team physician at Northwestern, Jim Phillips, the athletic director at the time, and a particular donor to create a program that was going to endow really the mental health support at Northwestern. I'm so thankful I did because of the outcome that's occurring there in Evanston from that, but more so for me, at least, because it gave me such incredible insight into that space that otherwise from my day in and day out role, I wasn't going to get and understand. So I really came in to KU really laser focused. One of my early sessions, and certainly the first meeting I had with our sports medicine and Kansas team health folks, was the question of what are we doing there? Where are there gaps? And what do we need to do? And I would probably, maybe guess that one of the first, if not the first, personnel decisions we made upon my arrival was to commit to funding and hiring an additional clinical social worker, because I saw immediately the way in which we were overwhelmed in that space, and we were tapping into campus resources, but not to the extent that we needed to. And without even understanding, really, frankly, our budget situation or our personnel situation in other areas, I just said, we have to add another individual there. And that was just one minor step. But like every place in the country, if you're not paying attention and if you're not continuing to invest, then we're doing our young people, a disservice. And so we've got a foundation here at KU, probably like most do at this juncture, where there's really good allocation of resources and staffing and personnel. But we've got a long way to go. And I hope that in 5, 7, 8, 10 years, we look back and go, we are doing mental health, mental wellness, and intercollegiate athletics better than just about any other entity. And I think there's an opportunity for us to actually achieve that in college athletics.
When you were doing that Northwestern and here, did you explore external? Is you outsourcing it? I'm just curious. Is that something, or you say, no, this is something we really need to be in charge of? I'm just curious in that process.
I think it's really a combo. I mean, I think it's going, what can you do that literally lives, eats, breathes within the walls of athletics, so that there's relationship building with those professionals, so to speak. And then of course you have to look at, well, what else can we do to tap into campus and or community resources? So I think the answer is always going to be both in that space.
Makes sense.
Travis, what about your own mental health? Like, this past 6 months has to have been like a whirlwind for you, right? I mean, you got your dream job, you're moving, your family's moving, and you can't pour from an empty cup, is what we always hear, right? So what have you been doing to take care of yourself? And what's your message for, these younger ADs who are coming into the chair, maybe not ready for that, the mental aftermath of that? Yeah,
no, I mean, real experience there. The toughest part for me was the first 2.5, 3 months where my family was still back in Chicago, and I was here just immersed in this thing. And I think we all recognize that being fully immersed literally all day, every day is not healthy and not sustainable for anybody, period. I don't care who you are. And so I reached that point because I was making that trip back to Chicago every 2 or 3 weeks and trying to fill my cup with them and help fill their cup. And frankly, you're failing in that end, right? Because what you're doing, especially with me with little kids, is you're just teasing them with a 36-hour, maybe a 48-hour stopover back in Chicago. And then you're getting back on that plane, you're coming down here, and you're more drained than maybe when you got up there on a Friday evening. And so just trying to figure out the best way in which I could lift them up and provide a boost during that transition when they were really doing that on their own, my wife doing that on her own with little kids. But then also trying to figure out, well, okay, I'm coming back to work because we've got a lot of things that need to happen at KU, including, again, doing a football search right away. And what are the things that I can do to give myself that energy? And I think it was just, focused on the opportunity to really have an impact on the people of KU and our athletic department and our student athletes. And that's where I got most of my energy from in those early few months. And certainly now with my family here, every day, every week has been more about, now we've got roots in the ground. Kids are doing great. My wife has been embraced in an amazing way. And I've got my feet underneath me to an extent, not to the right extent, but there's no real blueprint. And that was a true challenge. As incredible as this opportunity was for me and my family, those transitions are not easy, especially when they're disjointed and the rest of the crew. The other part of my life, right? The primary part of my life is, a number of states away, and I'm back here, in Lawrence, a place I love, but taking on a challenge that was at a whole new level for me career-wise. Yeah.
Well, you seem like you're doing great. So we're glad to see that. Can we take a minute and talk to the young professionals and maybe the middle managers who are on this call today? And maybe just some advice that you have for them about how do you know when you're ready to take the leap and make that move to your next position, your next institution? Just talk about maybe that feeling and those signs and how you go through that process.
Yeah, another great one. And I think, there's no two situations are the same. I think we all recognize that. The things that I use, I could probably only speak from my experience and my perspective. The things I used to help guide me were twofold. And this wasn't always intentional. Sometimes I was fortunate for it to play out this way, but twofold that I look back on. Number one, was I taking full advantage of the opportunities my current environment provided me to grow, right? And to have growth, I believe you have to actually make real impact and sustained impact. If you're dabbling around on the edges or you're just beginning to start to learn and develop, then I don't really think you're growing in the right manner. I think growth is nitty gritty, at times hard, murky stuff. And I think real growth happens when you reach those moments you're like, I don't know if I can do this any longer, or if I want to do it at this particular place. And you push through that, you come out on the other side, and the next thing you know, you've done something for that place, and you've done something within yourself that otherwise you wouldn't, right? And so for me, 8.5 years at Tulane, kind of powering through the Hurricane Katrina experience, recommitting to Tulane, recommitting to New Orleans, and being part of that rebuild down there really taught me a lot. Getting to Northwestern, and at some juncture feeling like I might be ready to go be an athletic director, what I recognized on my own a couple times or was forced upon me, meaning I didn't get opportunities that I might have sought, right, was that I had more of that nitty gritty growth that I needed to pursue at Northwestern. So asking yourself the question, have you really maximized the learnings and the growth that you have at your current situation, number one? And then the other reinforcing factor is, what else can I do to make a difference at this place? And those two dynamics work really well together. And by asking the question, what else can I do? You then embrace the opportunity to go make a broader impact, helps build out the resume. It helps demonstrate your value. And then of course, I think inevitably is going to open more doors for you. So those are the two things that I think back of along my journey.
And do you feel like if people aren't asking or people aren't reaching out to you for a spot and you're always having to ask, that's an indication, or no, like you?
In terms of other opportunities?
Yeah,
Is that
like
what you mean?
Yeah, if you think you're ready for the AD chair, but no one's mentioning you or asking or reaching out, without you soliciting them, is that an indication at all?
It could be part of an indication, but I also think that very few of us are just sitting and it just comes downhill.
Yeah.
Right. Is sometimes tough or challenging as it is to accept that no, I haven't had people banging down my door for years, right? I mean, it's taken a
15 years
confluence of opportunity. It's taken incredible mentorship and support. And then it's taken, again, the heavy lifting of the actual work for that to occur, for it to be a more natural progression. So I think it's always a combination. You need to start to get outreach. People need to take notice, but I think they need to do it for the right way, right reasons. You'll never regret earning those calls versus forcing those calls.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
And Dan, I know we gotta get Travis off to his next meeting, so we should probably wrap up if that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Travis, so much. And thank you, audience, for your questions. It was great interaction. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we really, really appreciate it. And I can't thank you enough for doing this, Travis.
No, it was a lot of fun. My pleasure. Appreciate those who participated, Drew, Bob, Dana, the whole group. Thanks for the opportunity, and rock chalk, right?
Rock chalk, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
There you go.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.